Congresswoman Jackie Speier represents California's 14th Congressional District, which stretches from the southern portion of San Francisco down through San Mateo County to Redwood City and East Palo Alto. She is a tireless advocate for women's rights, the public good, and the security of Americans. She was named to Newsweek's list of 150 fearless women in the world. Congresswoman Speier serves on the House Armed Services Committee as the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Military Personnel on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. Congresswoman Speier has been active in public service for more than 3 decades. Before serving in the House of Representatives, she served in the state legislature and on the Board of Supervisors. We appreciate her extensive efforts on behalf of San Mateo County. Please join me in welcoming Congresswoman Speier.
I want to thank Stacy Wagner as one of the vice chairs of the chamber. She puts these programs together. She is fabulous. Thank you, Stacy. The chamber would not function without Amy Buckmaster and Carolina Webster. So thank you. Actually, I really wonder sometimes if the community and/or all of us as community members would function without having such a strong and active and committed chamber to residents, businesses, nonprofits, education, and the list goes on. I also want to explain, Congresswoman Speier and I aren't just leaving at 9 a.m. because. We are leaving because today is a really historic day in San Mateo County. It is the official groundbreaking for the Caltrain electrification and the receiving of the $647 million, thank you, Congresswoman Speier, grant. One of my questions is going to circle back to that, because honestly, without the woman sitting right here across from me, who I have so much respect and admiration for, that railroad outside here would not exist. And I'll explain a little bit later. But I'd like to start with a first question, because I think this is top of the mind for everyone. You are about getting things done, from your time on the Board of Supervisors to the state legislature to private industry and now in Congress. With the new administration and with the highly charged and partisan atmosphere in DC, please tell us how you're able to get things done, because that's who you are, and I know you can work through these challenges. So please share with the audience.
Okay, well, Roseanne, thank you. Thank you, Stacy. Thank each and every one of you for coming out at this ungodly, hour. I would first like to say that there is nothing better than coming home. And I got on that plane last night, and I really had no way of imagining what next week was going to be like. Because as I got onto that plane, word came out that the president was considering pardoning himself, his family, and wiping out the judiciary in this country. And it was like the blood had just left my body. I thought, what is happening here? What really is happening? You know, the signs of a dictator are first you shut down the media, and then you wipe out the judiciary. And the underpinning of our country is really at risk right now. And it's going to take leadership in Washington from people who are going to have to stand up and challenge what is just an irregularity in the presidency that cannot be tolerated. We're going to have to go back to regular order. We're going to have to go back to the principles on which we negotiate legislation, Republicans and Democrats together, or we will have, just a floundering over the next few years, and the economy will tank. So to answer your question, how do you get things done? I spent 18 years in the state legislature and had 300 bills signed into law. When you are in the legislature, you introduce a bill, and you have the opportunity to have that bill heard in committee. And it's up to you to generate the votes to get it passed out of the committee and then onto the floor and then into the other house and then to the governor's desk for signature. In the Congress of the United States, you introduce a bill and you're almost guaranteed it will go nowhere. So the only way you get things through is, it took me a while to figure this out, you get on a committee like the Armed Services Committee where every year that National Defense Authorization Act has to be passed. And then you slip in amendments into the National Defense Authorization Act, and that's how you get things done. That's how I'm attempting to get things done in Washington right now.
Do you want to share with us a few things that you have inserted in that just are top of the mind? Because I'm thinking our next question goes right into healthcare. And I know Samsita just did a poll in San Mateo County. The #1 issue for residents is healthcare. You held a town hall in Pacifica not that long ago to talk about the Affordable Care Act, to talk about those that, I mean, there are folks that want to repeal it, that want to change it, that want to totally begin again. So perhaps going into that and thinking about some amendments that you might have made.
So in terms of the Affordable Care Act, there has been an attempt to repeal and replace it that I've voted against 65 times in the House of Representatives. 65 times over the last 7 years. The efforts, as you've seen it play out over the last 3 or 4 months, is a process that doesn't suggest that we are using regular order, because there have been no hearings on the bills in either house. There's been closed-door meetings. There have been efforts to put a bill on the floor and make members vote for it, who frankly didn't even want to vote for it. There are many Republicans in the House that voted for the House bill that really didn't want to vote for it. So that process isn't working as it should be. What will happen next week is that Mitch McConnell, who is the leader on the Senate side, is going to force a vote on a repeal only.
So a straight up repeal of the Affordable Care Act.
The Congressional Budget Office has already estimated that 32 million people will be without insurance by 2026, and about 14 million people will be without insurance next year. The whole market will collapse. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I would be shocked if it passes. If it were to pass, it would then have to be taken up in the House, and then it would go to the president. What we need to do is get beyond where we've been. And to get beyond where we've been, it really is going to require taking the Affordable Care Act. It's got lots of issues, and I'll be the first to admit it. There are things that we need to do to bring the cost of health care down. We have the most expensive health care in the world, and yet the life expectancy for all of us is less than it is anywhere else. So there are many things that can be done immediately to bring down premiums. The Kaiser Family Foundation has said that if you just stabilize the markets and make it permanent that subsidies will be available to those who qualify, you will reduce premiums by 19%. If you then take this reinsurance pool that actually expired at the end of 2016, and that was created so if some insurers got more sicker patients than others, that there would be a way of evening it out, so it would be fair to all insurers. So this reinsurance pool was there to rebate to insurers for chronically ill patients that had extraordinary costs associated with them. That no longer exists. If that is put back into place, you'd see premiums drop another 14%. Then there's issues around prescription drugs and the fact that we tied our hands with Medicare and not allowing for the negotiation of prescription drugs. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. In part because we already negotiate for drugs for the Medi-Cal population. We do that here in the state. It's done as well in other states and in the country. So prescription drugs is an area where you can save big money. Beyond that, there are many other provisions that are being suggested, some of which I wholeheartedly endorse, that would help with cost containment. One of the areas that no one talks about, I talk about it because I spent so many years in the state legislature working on it, is ancillary medical services, in which physicians have an ownership interest. It's a real conflict of interest. We realized that we saw in California that it would save $1 billion back then in 1994 if we prevented that. And the Medicaid system would benefit, and workers' comp would benefit. So we passed it in California. Basically said physicians could not refer patients to ancillary medical services in which they had an interest, the MRI, the clinical labs, the physical therapy centers, because there was overutilization that took place. We gave one exception, which was if you had an in-office service, like the x-ray in your office, that you could continue to provide that service. Well, the MRIs used to be in huge buildings. Fast forward now 20 years almost, and you just roll the MRI into your office. So the actual exception has gobbled up the rule. The General Accounting Office has looked at like 5 specialties, and they say it would save $10 billion over 5 years if we just did that one thing. So there's many efforts like that that can bring the cost down, but we've got to stabilize the market first.
I think it's very hard for the audience or the consumer, the community member, to understand when things are explained with common sense, it's clear to us what needs to be done. Where do you see the disconnect with your colleagues, and where do you see the commonality, kind of the common ground, and how do you get the sort of outliers to come to the table and really figure this stuff out? Because what you're saying makes perfect sense. I mean, I looking around the room and I see folks nodding, and I think to myself, why
are we here?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
Let me take some blame for that. Democrats did a lousy job messaging this bill. President didn't do such a great job, and the Democrats did a lousy job. The Republicans beat the drum. Repeal and replace, repeal and replace. Now, what's interesting, during the last 6 years, the Affordable Care Act wasn't all that popular. It's really gotten very popular now because people see what they're about to lose. The number of bankruptcies in this country have dropped by 50% because there are no longer annual caps, there are no longer lifetime caps, and everyone can access health insurance. So you can keep your kids on your plan until they're 26. All your costs associated with preventative care, the mammographies, the colonoscopies, you used to have to pay a copay with those. Now you don't pay any copays. Now a lot of people say, yeah, but I have employer-based insurance. What's really interesting is that everyone won when the Affordable Care Act was passed because employer-sponsored health insurance got a lot better as well. Many of them had annual caps or lifetime caps. Many of them had copays for preventative care. All of those went by the wayside. Kids could stay on their plans. So everybody in the country won, and particularly those who were uninsured, particularly those that stayed in jobs because of their health insurance and didn't, become independent contractors and start their own businesses because of fear they wouldn't have health insurance. So there's still things wrong with it. I kind of listed some of them, but in the end, we did a lousy job marketing it.
If you had to market it today, because I think this is a learning lesson, what would be the top 5 things you would say to your constituents about the Affordable Care Act to help them? Like, how would you message differently?
Well, I think we should do Medicare for all. Let me just put that out there. I mean, that's how you can just cut through all of this. And we know the Medicare system works. It needs work as well. But I would say that there's something in it, there's something in that law for everyone. And we would have to pitch it that way. But there was a lot of scare tactics. I mean, remember the death panels that never materialized? I mean, there was just a spinmeister out there on the other side doing a hell of a job.
I'm going to pivot to a totally different subject because when I said earlier, Caltrain wouldn't be where it is today without you, without the introduction of the baby bullet. The service began in 2004, but you worked on it far before that. So I'd love for you, this is a monumental moment in our transportation network for not only San Mateo County, but for the region, and the electrification of Caltrain and what comes from that. But let's go back to your time. You've been an advocate for transportation from the time on the Board of Supervisors to the state legislature. You were the one that brought the money home for baby bullet. So the audience, I'm not sure, is as familiar with that piece of Caltrain's history. So I'd love for you to share that.
Well, there's a funny story about it. But first, I would like to have Brian Perkins stand up, who was responsible for shepherding that through the state legislature, and be recognized for it. So Brian and I, when I was in the state senate, actually drove together 3 days a week, back and forth, because I had small kids and was a single mom for a good part of that time. So we had a lot of time to talk. And it was Brian who coined the word baby bullet, because I wanted to make sure that it had some pizzazz. So what happened was, we were meeting with Samtrans, trying to find how we could somehow jumpstart Caltrain better than we had, building these auxiliary lanes so that you could, have an express ride and stop at fewer stops and reduce the length of time that you could get from San Francisco to San Jose, seemed to make a lot of sense. But here's what really happened, and sometimes it's just serendipitous. Matira and Ross had called me and was asking me about transportation. What was I doing about transportation? I says, well, I'm actually about to release a proposal, and if you want, in about 5 days, I can give you the scoop. So when we were ready to release the bill, asking for $127 million for the baby bullet, and we actually also wanted to provide what we called the Valley Bullet, and have it coming from the valley over the Dumbarton Bridge, but then they eschewed it. We would have gotten more money if they had bought into it, but they didn't want to buy into it. So I introduced the bill, I give them the scoop. Gray Davis, who was then the governor of the state, every morning would get on his treadmill and read the paper. And here it was, headline in the Matira and Ross section of the paper. He calls his staff and says, and that was the year we had a $12 billion surplus. And so he was looking for one-time projects to spend the money on. He calls his staff and says, is this in our proposal? And of course it wasn't. And that's how it got into the package. So I thank Matira and Ross and Brian Perkins.
I think we should show our appreciation. Matira and Ross are the columnists for the San Francisco Chronicle, just so folks know. But tell us about the journey with the $647 million grant, because that was a 5-month painful exercise. So I'd love to hear your perspective. You were in Washington. You were at the front lines. You were pushing Secretary Chow, Secretary of Transportation, to really do the right thing.
So, we had it all lined up at the end of the Obama administration, and we wanted to get the sign-off by January 15th so there wouldn't be any hitches. It didn't quite work out that way, so it overlapped into the Trump administration, and Elaine Chao, of course, is the Secretary of Transportation now. It's so petty that it's going to make you shake your head. But the majority leader of the House is from California. His name is McCarthy. And he's from Bakersfield, and he doesn't support high-speed rail, and he doesn't want it coming near his district. And he got wind of the fact that some of the money for this electrification was coming out of the high-speed rail bond measure, in addition to the money coming from the federal government. So he just wanted to kill it. And he's very close with the president. So all of a sudden, we hit a roadblock. And Elaine Chao was not going to respond. It took everyone. And there was a lot of handshaking and a lot of hand-wringing, and in the end, a lot of high-fiving. But we had every CEO in the Valley write a letter to the president. It's 9,000 jobs that's going to be created, indirect and direct. It's going to speed the time from San Francisco to San Jose. It's going to take all of the ozone, 97% of the ozone out of the air. I mean, it's like this good news story, and it was being scuttled because one member, a powerful member, didn't want it to move forward. So it took the senators and Elaine Chao's a good friend of Senator Feinstein. She had multiple conversations with her. Senator Harris said she was going to hold on some of the appointments for the Department of Transportation. Leader McCarthy came up to me and, you have to get every member of your state to name a post office. So he comes up to me and asked me to sign his post office bill, and I looked at him and I said, if you get out of my district, I'll get out of your district. I'll sign this when you release the $600 million from... I don't think I was responsible for releasing the $600 million. But in any case, there was enough pressure brought to bear by everybody. And part of my message today at the groundbreaking is going to be this. When this region, San Francisco, San Mateo, Santa Clara counties, when this region comes together, nothing can stop us. Not the politics of Washington, not a diesel engine, nothing can stop us. And we need to start thinking regionally to be able to gain the kind of clout we deserve in Washington.
Thank you, because I think that message is so important today. The CEO of Caltrain is here. He's going to be heading out shortly. Thank you, Jim Hartnett and your team, because it was day in and day out that you contacted the business community, the nonprofit, the education, our legislators. I mean, it was a full court press. The chambers, the letters were constant, the pressure was constant, and today we get to celebrate, and in just a few short years, we'll be riding electrified trains. So I think that deserves another round.
Jim, where are you? Stand up.
This is also, I think, a great example of how more can get done throughout the country. And part of the issue with last November's election was the jobs that have been left behind. And Congresswoman Speier, I know you have been a proponent, and we have the chancellor of the community college district, we have our trustees, there are a lot of education trustees and advocates in the room. The jobs that we're losing to technology, there's some loss to technology, but there's also the retraining and the jobs that no matter what will never come back. So I'd love for you to talk about workforce development. Here we are in Box. We have a red hot industry in Silicon Valley, especially in this area. There are a lot more jobs than there are people, but we still have in this county, 3% unemployment. It is the lowest unemployment of any county in the state. Our unemployment in this area, but the jobs and the skills don't necessarily match. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
So for all of the talk nationally about the exporting of jobs to foreign countries is really, for the most part, misplaced. The vast majority of jobs that we have lost is to automation. And we've got to come to grips with that. It's something, 3 to 5 jobs are lost for every robot that comes into place. And one of the most stunning figures I read recently, there's a great website I encourage you to follow. It's called Axios, A-X-I-O-S. And they have a section of one particular writer who only writes about the future. And he did a whole piece on this, that outside of Africa, the average age in 2030, I believe it is going to be over 60 years of age. And right now, it's like 29. So there's a dramatic change that's taking place, and we have got to think differently about work in general. Now, the Chancellor is here, Ron Galatola. Ron, stand up, because he's already got his finger on the pulse of what we need to do. I just convened a meeting that Ron was at with the community colleges of San Mateo and San Francisco, and companies in this county, big companies like IBM, new startup companies like Meta, that are desperate for workers. IBM has 60 jobs in San Francisco right now that are empty, vacant. There's a 3-month training component necessary, and then those individuals who will be hired are going to be making $80,000 a year. They don't necessarily need an AA degree. They may have been doing a job that now is being done by a robot. They could be retrained to do the new jobs that exist. So training is a key component of our ability to fill these jobs moving forward. And it's not always going to be with a degree. It can be with a certification. And we got to remember, about half the people in this country have high school degrees or less. So that is nothing to be uppity about. That's the reality. And they want jobs, and they work hard, and we've got to make sure that they have the skills to be able to get the jobs and do the jobs.
So what advice would you give us from the business community, from the nonprofit, from all of us, the education? What could we be doing better to get the training? How would you encourage us to better partner with the community college district? I have so much respect for our chancellor and trustees, Tom Moore and the others in the room. I sit on the board of NOVA, the Workforce Investment Board. I love their partnerships and that they enroll everyone. Everyone looking for a job gets immediately enrolled in NOVA, and they're trying to match the training. But how could we be doing this better?
Well, I really think that what we saw at that meeting was a real hunger to know that the community colleges were there and could provide the kind of training they're looking for. Some of that's been going on in the community colleges in our county for a long time, particularly in biotech. But some of these other industries don't know that you've got this real gem of a training facility and program, and that there can be tailor-made programs for companies in which the community colleges can be your best partner. So we need to create more opportunities to bring the businesses that have the jobs together with the community colleges to create the success stories.
And for those of you who don't know folks at the Community College District, please come up at the end, introduce yourself. You have Jonathan Bissell here, you have Ron Galatola, Dennis McBride, longtime Redwood City trustee. I mean, you have folks in the room to talk to, and please reach out to them. You're in companies, you know what jobs you need, you have concerns. We have some audience questions, so I'm going to pivot to a topic we haven't talked about, but with your position on the Armed Services Committee, the question is, concerned that the escalation of armed forces efforts in the Middle East. Could you comment on that?
We have been operating under the authorization to use military force that dates back, it's called the AUMF, it dates back to 2001. It is inappropriate to use that AUMF to engage in additional wars in the Middle East and around the world. So there's a group of us that have sent a letter to the president and imploring him that if he wants to engage in Syria, he needs to come to us and seek an AUMF. I will tell you that I had kind of a jarring realization not so long ago. Because I serve on the Intelligence Committee, I go to strange places around the world. They aren't necessarily watering spots. And I sit in a room that is totally closed off. It's like going into a vault. And over the course of 2 days, I will just be briefed by our intelligence community in those countries. So last year, I was in Vietnam and South Korea. And we've got 28,000 service members in South Korea right now and have had them there for a very long time. The DMZ is literally 45 minutes away from Seoul. But I also went to Vietnam, and what I want to tell you about is what I saw in Vietnam. Vietnam is a very exciting country. It's very productive. The people are happy and motivated, and they're doing very well. On the last day I was there, they give you a cultural experience because you sit in this vault for 2 days. They want to give you a sense that there is something else out there. So they took me to the Hanoi Hilton, as it was referred to. And it was where our great American, John McCain, was a POW. It started out as a pottery-making facility in the early 1900s when the French had it, and then they turned it into a jail, and then it became a prison. Now, it's a museum now, so you go through it, and you're seeing the history of the country and the culture through the country's eyes. So you get to this one area where they show all the demonstrations against the Vietnam War going on here in the United States and around the world. And then they show John McCain, among others, having Christmas celebrations and their Thanksgiving dinner. And I walked out of there and I thought, you know, we have a Vietnam memorial that has 58,000 names on it. Fighting a war over there between the North and the South for democracy. We lost all of those lives. That country is now united. It is communist. It is viable, successful, capitalistic. And I asked myself, what are we doing? So that's a precursor to what I'm about to say. If we are going to engage in a war, we have to be damn sure that we know what we want, we have a strategy, and we have an end game. Now, having said that, we will likely be in Afghanistan for the foreseeable future with a light footprint. I do not want to see it grow. But we do need to fight terrorism around the world. And there are cells that crop up like Hydra heads. We're successful right now, pushing back ISIS. But there will be another ISIS. So we always have to be prepared in that regard. But full-on engagement in wars, in my view, is something that we have got to be much more introspective about before engaging. Because we have too many lives that are at stake and at risk.
I look out at the audience, and I personally know and see a number of veterans. I want to thank you on their behalf. You are a tireless supporter of our veterans. You want better care for them. You want us to appreciate what they do. And so we want to thank you. And I'd like all the veterans in the room to stand up and really to say thank you.
Let me just say, for all of you who have family or friends who are veterans who live in this district, or even who don't live in this district, who've had any difficulty having disability claims processed through the Veterans Administration, call my office. My staff is the best, and over the course of the last few years, we've had over $5 million that has been returned to veterans who are in need of disability compensation that were waiting years to get their claims processed. And I will say this, if we are willing to send these men and women to war, and to serve our country, and to protect our freedom, whether they come home with visible wounds or emotional wounds, we owe them everything they need to survive. There shouldn't be one veteran, who is homeless in this country, and yet many of them are. And we're quick to send our men and women to war, and we're not so quick in making sure they have all the resources when they come home. And we've got to get much better at doing that.
Thank you so much. So going on to the next audience question, what we're hearing out of the current administration is everything kind of about building a wall, sanctuary cities, but what the question is what about immigration reform? Where do we go next? What can we do?
This week, I hope you follow me on Facebook and Twitter, because sometimes there's fun things on there. This week, I took a photograph with 10 14-year-old Afghani women who were here for a tech coding competition. Now, they weren't going to come here because our policy now refuses to let people, even students, come to our country. So happened that it was in the New York Times, and Ivanka Trump saw it, and she went to her father and got a special visa so that they could come over. I mean, I'm glad it happened, but that's not the way it should happen. And we're sending our men and women to Afghanistan to protect the people and to train them, and then we're not allowing them to come over here to participate in a robotics competition. I mean, it's foolish. So our immigration system is broken. We had a bill that passed the Senate, bipartisan support, the likes of Senators Rubio and McCain and Graham, that came over to the House. And I mentioned earlier that you can introduce a bill and nothing's going to happen. Well, a bill can come from the Senate and nothing can happen. So that bill sat for 2 years and nothing was ever done. It was comprehensive immigration reform. I embraced it. It basically provided that a pathway to citizenship if you hadn't committed a crime, if you had been here, you pay your taxes, you pay a fine, and you get in the back of the line in terms of the pathway to citizenship. It allowed those who were here to stay here if you met all of those criteria. Now, there are 12 million people, many of them your next door neighbors, my next door neighbors, the people that do your gardening or build your homes or remodel your homes, that are here without papers. And some of them have children who were born here or kids that are DACA kids, and they are part and parcel of our society. Now, should we change our rules somewhat to kind of make it everyone play by the rules? Yeah. You know how many people end up staying here on visitors' visas because we don't track them, or student visas? Now, I would also say, if you get a STEM degree at one of our universities, along with that diploma should come a green card. Because what we do know is that most of the STEM jobs in this valley are held by persons who are immigrants. And a significant number of our CEOs are immigrants as well. My father was an immigrant to this country. Most of you probably have family stories like that. So we can make the system fair. We can have people comply with the laws, but we've got to fix our own laws. That means having E-Verify for employers. That means tracking visitors' visas and tracking student visas better than we have, and creating a compassionate world for refugees. As a country, we have done so little for the Syrian refugees and refugees around the world that it's actually shameful. Other countries have taken 1 million. Germany has taken 1 million. I was in Germany not so long ago, and a Syrian gentleman was talking to me. He spoke really good English. He was learning German at this community center where Germans were coming in the evenings to teach these Syrian refugees how to speak German. He had spent 3 months walking from Syria to Germany. And there are 1 million refugees, mostly men, in Germany right now. And we're refusing to take women and children from Syria.
Let's ask the audience something, if you'll indulge me. How many of you, your parents or your grandparents, are immigrants? Raise your hand. Okay, so I think that
How many of you came over in the Mayflower?
Do we have anyone? Just out of curiosity? I mean, parents, generational, looking backwards. But think about it. Look at this audience. And then if you go through our region, if you go through the US, think about where we all came from. I mean, I'm proud that my grandparents came from Ireland and Hungary. I think about the work ethic with your dad. Wherever your dad is, I am sure he is incredibly, incredibly proud. And your mom too. I think it's important that we recognize kind of the base that our parents gave us. So we have 2 more questions from the audience, and one is with regard to visioning for public transportation. You mentioned it regionally, that we need to think regionally. The person asked, what do you see for us over the next 10, 20, and 50 years? Or where do you think we should be?
Well, in terms of visioning transportation, you really can't talk about transportation without talking about housing. And we created, 24,000 new jobs in just the last couple of years in this region, and virtually no housing. So the transportation component becomes that much more intensive because people are coming from outside the area. So the couple of things. Electrification is going to prevent 7 more lanes of highway on 101. That's a good thing, right? Can you imagine 7 more lanes of highway? We have 800 corporate buses moving in and out of this region every day. So we have to think differently. And as I see it, driverless cars, again, that's another issue with all the Uber drivers, the cab drivers, the truck drivers, all of whom are going to have to be retrained. So I think our transportation world is going to be different, just like the way we fight wars is going to be different. You know, we don't necessarily need a lot of aircraft carriers when we're starting to use drones. Not everyone's going to own a car because you can just call up a driverless car to take you wherever you need to go. But we also have to be a whole lot smarter about where we place housing. And I drive up and down El Camino now because 101 is so congested when I'm in town. And I'm looking at all of the space on El Camino that could be so much better utilized if we built more dense housing so people could get on a bus or a train to get to where they want to go rather than getting into a car. And I think we have a generation of young people that don't even want to own cars. So we've got to, in terms of visioning for the future, we got to realize that, you know, they're not going to want to live the way we have lived. And they're not going to be tied to a car necessarily the way we are. And they're not going to necessarily want housing that looks like it's 2,500 square feet with a white picket fence. I mean, they may want smaller spaces and huge community settings where they can actually go and hang out and do things with their friends. Ann Wojcicki at 23andMe is a great, you should actually invite Ann to come speak at some point. She is terrific. And I've worked with her on trying to get our FDA to recognize we have the right to know what our genome looks like, and we don't need to have a doctor in order to get that information, but that's a whole other story. Because right now, believe it or not, you can get an AIDS test at the pharmacy without a prescription, without a doctor's consultation. And they're trying to argue that you need to have a physician consultation in order to have a document that talks about your ancestry and your DNA. But anyway, she's trying to do in, I think it's Los Altos, she's bought a lot of land, and she wants to build 400 square foot micro units with big community space, whether it's park or community centers, because she believes that, you know, this whole generation, many of whom are probably here in this room right now, live differently. The folks here at Box live differently and have different desires too. So in terms of visioning, we've got to put on rose-colored glasses that look at a whole new generation, not the older generation.
Housing is a sensitive issue in this area. It brings up feelings in people that are very strong. People who want the white picket fences and the 2,500 square foot home, people who like the density along transit. What advice would you give to community members? We have a lot of elected officials here. You look around our communities, 70% of San Mateo County is protected open space, and in my lifetime, I don't see that ever changing. I just think people want that. So how do you balance? You have constituents on both sides.
So I think you start where you can grab the attention of those who have their homes. Those who have their homes, and I talk to them all the time, are concerned that their kids are never going to be able to live here. So you have to appeal to them from that perspective. You also have to appeal to them in terms of health and safety. The big earthquake occurs, and if all of our first responders live 90 miles away, good luck. Now, Ron Galatola and his board should get a lot of credit for recognizing how you can stem part of the problem. They were having a problem because their faculty and staff were living, you know, hour and a half away. They were losing staff. So they decided to take some of their surplus land and turn it into housing for their faculty and staff. They had a lot of NIMBYism, right, Ron? I mean, a lot of folks up there on the hill that didn't want anything to do with it and fought it. But it passed, it got built, and the great part of it was offering that rental property to their employees for 50% of what the market rate is a huge benefit. And they get to live there up to 7 years, hopefully build a nest egg, and then go out and buy their own places. My office, Brian has worked on this nonstop, have gone to all the cities and all the school districts, have taken Ron and a dog and pony show to make the case this can be done. Cities and counties and school districts can take surplus land that they own and build housing on it through what are called certificates of participation, and make the money back in short order, create housing for law enforcement, first responders, school teachers, faculty, and have it benefit everybody. So, I mean, I think that's one easy step to try and move forward on.
I think the college district deserves a round of applause. I mean, they took it on early. So the last audience question is, how likely do you think it is that the administration will be successful in turning back the environmental protections that have been in place for years and years? I mean, the Environmental Protection Agency came into existence under President Nixon, a Republican president. And now today, here we are.
Well, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the EPA all came into existence under President Nixon. Think about that. So this last week or the week before, they passed a bill out of the House called the Smoggy Skies Act. That was the name of it.
Can you repeat that? Because I'm just sitting here saying, did Congresswoman say what I think she just said?
Smoggy Skies Act is the name, and it basically would postpone any regulation on smog for companies for 8 years that were put in place by the Obama administration. And then they would only be put in place if it was technologically and economically feasible. So it is basically suggesting that, asthma sufferers, too bad. Respiratory sufferers with ailments, too bad. I mean, it is a rollback of sorts that we haven't seen in a couple of generations. And the question, is it happening? Is it going to happen? It's already happening. And that's why, and I don't mean to be political, that's why the House has got to be retaken by the Democrats in 2018. If for no other reason than to create some balance. Because right now there's no backstop to any of this. And there's no negotiations. I mean, literally, the Democrats aren't asked for any input, and if you offer amendments, which I've offered to a number of bills, they make them out of order in the Rules Committee, so they're not even taken up on the floor. Sorry for all the bad news.
So, what I'd like to ask is a final question, because you have had and I can't think of a different word, but extraordinary life, extraordinary challenges. You have come through probably some of the most difficult times that anyone in this room would ever face. You're sitting there today. You are so knowledgeable, so articulate. You have answered a whole host of questions. How would you give the audience hope? Because I know it's something that has been a part of your DNA since you left law school and went into your career. And so how could you impart to the audience? We all need hope at this point. You can take politics aside, but just considering everything that our country is facing on so many different levels, what would you say to give people hope, to help them engage, and to help them walk out of here today and say, you know what? I can do this, whatever it is.
Okay, let me start by saying this. We have survived bad leadership in the presidency before, and we will survive this. What I like to remind everyone is that the President of the United States is not the box at the top of the org chart. I know President Trump thinks he is, but in truth, he is not the top box. Top box, at box. Okay. The top box is what?
Us.
Actually, it's sort of us, but the Constitution of the United States. So on the org chart of this country, you have the Constitution at the top, and then you have three boxes. You have the executive branch, you have the legislative branch, and you have the judicial branch. So truly, we're three equal branches of government, and the checks and balances were put there by our founding fathers, and they need to be exercised. Beyond that, I would say that the media in this country will save us. Whether you like Fox or CNN or MSNBC, I mean, making sure there's a spotlight on the issues is really important. And they cannot be drowned out. I would also say that this election cycle and the last 6 months has really awakened in every American their obligation to participate. Kids are engaged. Parents are engaged. Mature seniors are engaged. Because everyone does have something at stake here. The Women's March that took place on January 21st around the world, but in cities in this country, 3.5 to 4.6 million people marched on January 21st. It is the largest demonstration in American history. So, it is really important to engage. It's really important to make sure that we protect this very special democracy. There are countries, and one in particular, that wants to make an example of the United States as to what's wrong with democracies, and to undermine this democracy to be able to promote a much different way of life. And we just can't let that happen. And I've got to tell you, I have never felt more certain of what my job is than I do right now. And I've had 10 town halls since the beginning of the year, and we'll continue to have them because engagement is really important. The other thing we have to be aware of is that we live in an extraordinary bubble here. It's really important for us to appreciate that people's lives in other parts of the country are very different. And we've got to make sure that every American has a chance at a decent job. And if it requires retraining, we got to be there to provide it. And a decent home and the ability to put food on the table. And that's my job right now. And my job is to make you feel that you have every reason to be hopeful and optimistic. So please don't leave here not feeling that way. But you do have to engage. This is not a spectator sport.
I want to take this opportunity, first and foremost, to thank members of the Redwood City Police Department, the Redwood City Fire Department. Chief Maupin is here for providing a sense of security and calm to today with our Congresswoman being here. I want to thank the Chamber of Commerce, amazing group of individuals. And I want to thank Congresswoman Jackie Speier. We are lucky.